We're live, and we are live anyway. Hi, we're back again. So if you're just joining us, welcome. My name's Jesse. I'm joined here by Peter. We're from Geneva, Switzerland, and we are some of the organizers of this global event today. And we're really pleased that you were all able to take time out of your day or evening. For some of you, it's the middle of the night. So great to have everybody aboard this crazy ship UX. We are on the Hopin platform. Many thanks to them for this, as well as to our sponsors today, Adobe XD, UX Testing. Really great to have their support to make this possible and to keep it free. So look, you're getting incredible content that's authentic and local, as well as internationally renowned. And we're about to be joined by another rock star of the UX and design world and agile world, Jeff Gothelf. And I hope he'll be coming on board in a moment. We told him to join a little late, so he might show up a little late, and Peter and I may.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time that we're doing a 24-hour live nonstop thing with 24 different participants at every hour. So the transition at the top of the hour, in the first few instances may have been a bit sort of rocky. We might have thrown some of the early groups off the stage maybe a bit early, but the thing is that after each hour, each of the groups has a session, which you can find on the left-hand side, where they retreat, and then after their talk, they have like a 30 or 60-minute Q&A session where you can also join via video and audio and have it more intimate than here on the stage,
exactly.
Which is more broadcast.
It's like walking into somebody's booth at a conference. You can go to the main stage and see what's happening here all day, or you can go over to a session and see if there's anybody there. And it's a little bit, in the sessions, it's a little bit more like a Zoom call. So you can ask to actually share your screen. There are 20 slots available per session for that. And you can have a direct conversation with the folks you just saw on stage, in the prior hour. There's also networking. If you haven't checked that out yet, take some time during the day to pop over to networking and do some speed dating with other UXers. Yeah, and I think we have, I don't know, what's the country count? Do we have a country count right now on the map, Peter?
Let me check if I don't know if we have a country count. We have now over 1,000 people online, which is great. There is so in the chat you see a mural at the top of the chat. There is a mural link posted, so you can click on that, and there you can on one hand pin yourself on the map just so we know where you are coming from, and you can also leave a message as inspiration or something similar. I see a lot of people are active right now there as well, so do join them. The number of pins are growing. I'd be hard pressed to count this, but definitely, a lot of people, of course, from Europe, but we are, there's a lot of people in Asia Pacific region as well, Africa, right. We have North and South America as well represented. So basically we're all around. I'm very happy to see that. Yeah,
you've heard the expression "paint the town red," right? Well, we're painting.
And I believe that Jeff might have arrived. So Jeff, if you are hearing this, then
there he is.
Welcome, and there he is. Jesse, all yours. I'm
all right.
Signing out.
Here I am.
Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, sorry, the UX of this particular application is a little challenging, to say the least. And so I popped in, I messaged Peter in the main chat. I was like, hey, Peter, I'm here. And somebody was like, yay, you're here. And I was like, I just had to tell someone because I didn't know how to get to where I needed to go.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, we're all getting the hang. So welcome.
Excellent. Welcome. Thank you. How long have you been awake?
I've been up since maybe 5 a.m. my time.
God, it's 6 hours. We're in the same time zone.
I know. I've got hours left. I'll probably be falling by the end of the day.
You're doing great.
Thank you very much. So I think everybody listening and watching, Jeff doesn't need much of an introduction. Hopefully you've all read that book that you see above his head there on the door. Really a tome, a very important book in our field. Jeff's also the author of Sense and Respond, right? Maybe 1 or 2 years ago.
Came out 3 years ago, actually. It's 2017.
Yeah, and has a brand new book out, which he'll be sharing insights from today. Be sure to show Jeff some love and buy that book. I'm going to post the link to it in the chat while he's giving his talk. And without further ado, Jeff, we're 3 minutes after the hour. It's all yours. Any issues, we're here for you, so just holler.
Thanks so much. And I saw in the chat that there's some echo, so I was muting my mic in case that was being caused on my end. So hopefully better now at the very least. Folks, thanks so much for joining me here. I'm going to share my screen and give you share my screen and talk about this new book primarily. It's going to be hopefully super interesting, and then we'll do some Q&A. There's my screen. That's a real photo, by the way, that I took. I like that photo. Anyway, let's talk about Forever Employable. Talk about Forever Employable and why I think it's absolutely relevant to UX, well, the UX designers, really designers in general, right? Because I think that there is this sense of we design things for other people all the time, but when do we actually take our skill sets, the things that we know, the things that we're good at, and apply them to ourselves, specifically our lives, our careers, our growth, and our professional development? And really, you'll notice, as I tell you the story, I think you'll notice that there are a lot of qualities of the experience that I'm sharing with you that come from design. And just FYI, as I'm speaking, I actually can't see the chat right now. So when I finish presenting, I'll come back and catch up with the chat right now. So if there's anything specific, just FYI, I can't see it in presentation mode at the moment. So let me start and tell you the story a little bit, okay? Story starts on my 35th birthday. I turned 35 on January 31st, 2008, and I woke up in a panic, in a cold sweat. And I was trying to figure out why that was, because up until that point, things were going pretty well. These were my kids in 2008. Today they are teenage daughters who were just fighting out there about 10 minutes ago about who's going to walk the dog, but they're still sweet and cute, a little bigger than that today. And up until that point in my life, I'd had a pretty good run overall. Things had gone according to plan for the most part, even with a bunch of crises in the way, right? I started off as a broke musician. I toured around in bands, playing piano with my best friends in the world, even to this day. And when I got tired of being broke, the internet came and saved me, right? The internet was this new way in the late 90s that you could get a job and make money. And in 1999, when I started working professionally and stopped trying to be a rock star, if you could spell HTML, you could get a job. And I did just that. I got a job at a company called IXL. IXL was one of the big Web 1.0 consulting companies. And I learned a ton on the job. And very shortly after I started my job there as a graphic designer and a front-end coder. Now, coder is an exaggeration. It was HTML, but that was web coding back then, web development back then. Somebody gave me this book, and I think a lot of you will recognize this book, I hope. This is a book called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. It's by Peter Morville and Lou Rosenfeld. Today, it is in its 4th edition. I think Jorge Arango helped with the 4th edition as well. This book changed my life. I was given this book shortly after I started my career at IXL. And somebody said to us, who wants to be an information architect? And I said, I want to be an information architect after reading this book, because it moved my work, my position in the waterfall, further upstream. So whereas as a web designer, web developer in 1999, I was at the end of the waterfall. All the decisions had been made. Now you implement them, right? IA seemed to be a move further up the waterfall, which appealed to me. And that really set me down the career towards UX and interaction design, and then design leadership and team leadership and product management and so forth and all this stuff. And for the record, I have met both Peter and Lou. I count Lou Rosenfeld as a friend these days. Not that Peter's not a friend. We haven't met that many times. But Lou I've met many times, and I consider Lou a friend. And I've told both of them that this book changed my life. I read this book, and it completely changed my direction. And so I set off in this direction to become a UX designer, and crap, the dot-com bubble bursts, and there's a crisis, and everything falls apart, and there's no jobs, and there's tons of layoffs, and the economy is crashing. You might sound familiar, right? And so I bounce around for a while, trying to stay employed as a UX designer in this new career. I end up going to a bunch of different companies. I spent some time at AOL, working on the software that went in these CDs. I did some design team leadership at a company called Web Trends on the West Coast. And then by 2008, I end up back in New York City at a company called The Ladders as the director of UX. And up until that point, I'd clawed my way up to the middle, right? I'd become this middle manager, right? After 10 years of working, I'd clawed my way up to the middle. So I wake up on my 35th birthday. Everything seems to be should be pretty good, but I'm terrified. I'm terrified that 5 years from that date, right? 5 years, I will be 40. And from when you're 35, 40 feels old. When you're 47, like I am today, 40 is like, woohoo, I want to be 40 again, right? But nevertheless, from 35, I'm like, hey, in 5 years, I'm going to be 40. I'm going to be old. I'm going to be expensive, and I'm going to be unemployable, because there are all of these younger, hungrier, better, and most importantly, cheaper designers coming up that were going to take work away from me. They were going to, I was going to be too expensive to continue to be employed as a designer and maybe as a design team manager. And I was seeing that with my colleagues and my peers who were a little bit older than me. And so on that morning of my 35th birthday, I made a big resolution for myself. I resolved that I was no longer going to look for jobs. That's it. And instead, jobs were going to look for me. Like, I just wasn't going to be in this rat race of updating my resume and then sending it out and then going to these interviews and hoping, but because I was going to lose that game. That was what I believed. I believed that inevitably I was going to end up losing that game. I needed to create a situation where jobs were going to look for me. That was the resolution, which I recognize is a fairly mind-blowing statement, right? You're like, oh my God, Jeff, those are really great words. They blow my mind, right? But this brings up a lot of other questions, right? A lot of other things to consider, right? 4 really big questions that came up immediately, right? Number one, does anyone know who I am, right? If jobs are going to find me, does anybody know me? Who knows who I am and what I can and can't do? Why would they look for me, right? So what problem do I help people solve? If jobs are going to find me, what problems do I help people solve? How would they find me? Right. So, yeah, sure, the internet exists, right? But specifically, how are people going to know where to look for me and they can find what they need there? And then ultimately, if jobs are going to find me, what kind of jobs are going to find me? And how do I set it up in such a way? How do I design it? Right. That's the key here. How do I design this in such a way that work that I want to do finds me? Right? These are the big questions I set out to answer. And I've spent the next 10 plus years, and I say 10 plus because it makes me feel better, but it's really been 12 plus years at this point and coming on 13 at this point. But I spent 10 plus years building my platform and answering these questions so that I can realize this resolution of I'm no longer going to look for jobs. Jobs are going to find me. And here's what I learned. I learned that there are at least 5 qualities that I found in myself that helped me build this kind of platform to becoming forever employable and helped me kind of think through how to design that for myself. And that I took 5 very explicit steps to get here. And all of that really comes together like this realization that you have to treat your career and your growth and your professional development like you do the products that you design and develop today. You really have to think about them as these systems that you continuously learn and improve and optimize to ensure that they're always yielding the best outcomes. I'm going to go through each one of these qualities and steps very, very quickly and give you a sense of what I mean by each one and how I discovered them sort of in myself, and then we can talk about it in the Q&A. But there's 5 qualities that I've found in myself that have helped me become forever unemployable, and they are these qualities. I'm going to go through each one of these very quickly and give you a sense of what each one means and how I discovered it myself. So entrepreneurialism. I had never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I was never the ideas guy. I was always the execution guy. You have a good idea, I'll help you realize it. But big ideas, that wasn't for me. And what's really interesting is that when I made this resolution, I said, okay, great. I need to put myself out there. I've got to figure out how to create this buzz around myself and really kind of design and build this system around myself. What experience can I draw on where I have been entrepreneurial? And you know what? It took me a while to realize this, but it turns out that actually bands are startups, right? They're entrepreneurial ventures. You and some friends get together. You have ideas that you think the world will benefit from, and you pour everything you have, your heart, your blood, sweat, tears, your money, your time, sometimes your relationships, right? Everything into this in a way that with the anticipation that you'll build a following and that you'll start to kind of build this into a self-sustaining entity, right? So I did have experience as an entrepreneur, and I was able to draw on that experience to start thinking about how to design this platform for myself. Self-confidence becomes really interesting, right? Because a lot of folks talk about, well, I'm not comfortable getting up there and talking about myself. What am I going to talk about, right? There's nothing I have to say that people want to hear. I hear that a lot, right? But it turns out that your experience has value, right? And your knowledge has value. And the story, your story that got you from the beginning to where you are today is yours alone. And if you can take that story and start to tell it, you know you're giving us a unique perspective on something, because none of us have your perspective, right? One of the parts of my story that I've been leveraging over the years, that I've been using over the years to tell stories, is my time with the circus, right? When I was in the circus, I joined the circus immediately after graduating from university. Literally, I graduated on a Saturday. And on Sunday, I put my stuff in storage. And on Monday, I was in the circus. I spent 6 months on the road living in that truck on the left side of the photo there. Not the nice one with the trailer behind it. The trailer, the one that says Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers Circus on it. That's where I lived with 7 other guys. And look, I learned a ton about myself and self-confidence there, because those were a pretty miserable 6 months, I have to tell you. And I've been sharing that as part of my story, and it's amazing to see that resonate. So not only did I learn to be more self-confident that I can overcome things by being in the circus, but using that as part of my story has helped me increase that self-confidence as well. Continuous learning is a key part of becoming forever employable. Reading, speaking with others, engaging in community, building new ideas based on that learning. It's the only way to progress, and it's the only way to get better. Otherwise, you're stagnant, right? And just like your products, you're going to be out of business soon if you continue to be stagnant, right? So I consume a ton of content, whether it's books or articles or blog posts or videos or podcasts or whatever it is, right? I'm always continuously learning and trying to get better. And frankly, I'm always trying to use that learning to improve myself, right? There's the sense that I can always be doing something better. For example, I do a lot of teaching, and I do a lot of workshops and training and that type of thing. One of the ways that I get better, and one of the ways that I've been getting better over the years, is I collaborate with others. This photo is from a workshop that I was teaching in Paris back in March, right before the travel bans all kicked in. It was the last trip I made. And I was teaching this workshop with Jeff Patton, who I believe spoke earlier today already, or maybe speaking later today, I'm not sure. Jeff and I teach together a lot because, well, we enjoy it, but equally as importantly, I learn a ton by working with Jeff. He comes at the same content from a different perspective. He teaches it differently, and I improve myself by working together with him in that sense. So improvement is a key part of being forever employable. And then ultimately, the last quality is reinvention. Reinvention means that the world is going to change around us constantly, but there's a core value that we bring to everything that we do. So how do we take that core value and then redesign it to fit into the current context, right? So what got you here isn't going to get you there, at least not the technical skills, right? There's just too much change. But as the world changes and your career progresses and market demands evolve, the way that you offer your services and your value to the market has to evolve. So for example, this article here on the screen that you see is part of my continuous reinvention. The product thinking, the design thinking work that I've been doing for years, I am now bringing to non-product teams, HR, finance, legal, risk, right? Those types of organizations that have never really thought about this kind of work before. And I write about it. This is an HBR post, right? And the idea is to continuously build this dialogue with the next thing that you want to be doing. So you're continuously redesigning every couple of years to make sure that whatever you're offering fits the current context, because the pace of change is tremendous, right? So those are the 5 qualities. Now, as we talk about the 5 steps that got me to where I am today, these are those 5 steps. I want to go through them very, very quickly. And then, again, more than happy to do a Q&A for as much time as we can today. So plant a flag, tell your story, follow the new path, teach, and give it all away. So here's the first one, planting a flag. Now, look, planting a flag is the metaphor that I'm using for deciding what slice of domain expertise you're going to own, right? If you're going to build a platform for yourself, if you're going to be the person who knows the most about this thing, if you're going to be the go-to person about this particular topic, what is that topic going to be? And the people who have done this well have done this really, really well, right? Their names are literally associated with these things. For example, I mean, here's one, right? So our buddy Eric Ries, right? He planted his flag, lean startup. He's the lean startup guy. That's how it goes, right? My friend Jake Knapp, right? Jake Knapp planted his flag. Where's his flag? Design sprints, right? That's his thing. Not far from where Jesse lives is our friend Alex Osterwalder. Alex planted his flag on business model generation, the business model canvas. And that's where they've become experts and the go-to people on those topics. For me, it was lean UX. That's where I planted my first flag, because I was solving a problem with my team, and for my company, and then with folks kind of beyond and outside of that world. And it was a problem that many, many other folks in the world really were having. And so there was a big opportunity there to create a conversation around integrating agile software development and user experience and design. So this is where I ended up planting my first flag. And sure enough, I've become the lean UX guy. For better or for worse, it's been 12 years of being the lean UX guy. And so if somebody wants to know about lean UX, generally speaking, they end up on my blog, in my Twitter feed, in my email inbox, or on a Zoom call, or whatever it is. And a lot of folks have been asking lately, how do I figure out where to plant my flag? And I've been thinking about how to diagram this. And as I've been putting this together, folks have been telling me that this resembles a lot of this Japanese model called Ikigai. So if you're familiar with this Japanese model of Ikigai, this is very, very similar to that, except this is I think this is a simpler version of that. And maybe as I dig more into Ikigai, I will maybe I'll update this. I'm sure I'll eventually update this. But the idea of thinking about where to plant your flag focuses at least on 3 variables, at least. So first of all, your passions and your expertise. What do you know? What are you good at? Where do you have experience? Where do you have your expertise, right? And this obviously should be your professional experience as well as your personal stuff, right? So for example, when I was thinking about where to plant my flag, I was still, fresh off the musician lifestyle. And I, as a keyboard player, I had amassed a collection of vintage electric pianos. I know an unnecessary amount of information about vintage electric pianos. And it's something that I could talk about for a long time. So I put that in the list, right? And then I started looking at trends in current events. Where's the world going? What are the technological trends, consumer consumption trends, geopolitical trends, socio-political trends, all these types of things. What's happening in the world, and market trends, that type of thing. And I'd list all those in there. And then lastly, kind of who's the target audience I want to go after, right? Who are the people that I want to speak to, and how many of those people are there? And in kind of thinking about those three variables, you end up with a few options there in the middle about where to plant your flag, things that you want to talk about, things that line up with where the world is headed and where there's potentially a large audience. And that's a good way to think about that. Now, even doing this type of exercise, you're going to end up likely with more than one option, and that's perfectly okay. One of the things that you want to end up doing is you want to start to think about how to decide which flag to go after, right? And so as you start to kind of lay out these different flag options, start to ask yourself these kinds of, product design, product development, product management questions, like, if I'm headed down this particular path to be the expert on X, what's the biggest risk here, right? The risk could be people don't see me as an expert in this field, or the audience isn't big enough, or I don't know what the best channel is to reach these folks, right? And then how can you test that? What are the experiments that you can run to test each one of those? Can you fire off a bunch of tweets and see what happens? Can you record a short 5-minute video and see what happens, right? So as you identify some of these flags, start to figure out how to run lightweight experiments to test those ideas, okay? So that's number one, plant your flag. Okay, step two, telling your story. So important. I told you, no one has your story. You have to tell it to anyone, everywhere, all the time. And to be clear here, the goal is to get you better at storytelling. Now, folks will jump in whenever I start this, and they'll right away and they say things like, I have doubts over this, right? Everyone has good experience. She has more to offer than I do. My story isn't extraordinary enough to be unique. And again, like I said before, the best part of your experience, of your story, is not whether you've run an ultramarathon or built a massive company or worked with stars or whatever it is, right? The best part of your experience is that nobody else has it. You can tell a story that no one else can, because you're the only person who has gone through everything you have in the ways and at the times that you have. Only you have that perspective, and people want to hear that perspective. So just start sharing what you know. Right? That's absolutely key. I started doing this in 2010. First time I started speaking about UX and Agile was at the big Agile conference one year, and we were talking about just getting past staggered sprints, right? So, a design sprint or being a sprint ahead, that type of thing. To point out something very, very clear, this is 2.5 years after my 35th birthday. This stuff didn't happen overnight, right? First talk, 2.5 years after I wake up in that cold sweat on January of 2008, right? A month later, the first Lean UX talk is given live in Paris. Very, very exciting. Again, 2.5 years after that particular moment. And then really kind of the big break comes 3 years after my 35th birthday. Lucky, super lucky, and privileged enough to get Vitaly and the team over at Smashing Magazine to publish this article. This article really changed everything because it took the conversation global. 1 million readers is what Smashing Magazine had in 2011, right? And this takes the whole conversation global, which allows me to start telling my story in different venues and in larger and larger venues over time, right? So I'm on stages, I'm talking about Lean UX at a variety of events, and really anywhere and everywhere that anyone would listen, I'm talking about this. All the channels, you name it, I was there. Twitter and Medium and LinkedIn and Quora and Facebook and my email newsletter. Honestly, the only thing we stopped short of was making Lean UX the musical. Thought about it very briefly, decided against it, right? But you're always out there telling the story. And as I reflect upon this, I try to think about why my story resonated, right? Why did this Lean UX conversation resonate? I think it resonated for the following reasons. First and foremost, I solved a real world problem that many people had. I was working on a challenge that a lot of people were facing. And so there was an audience eager to hear something about this. I was actually doing the work. I had actual real world experience that I could share. We tried this and it worked. We tried this and it didn't work. And that was key because I shared my wins and my losses, which shows humility. Humility draws that connection that says, hey, these folks didn't just kind of wake up one day and figure this stuff out. They experimented, they tested, they learned their way to a better way of working. And whatever we learned, I provided a very practical and tactical advice. Go do this, go try this. It worked for us, maybe it'll work for you. And that helps build that authentic connection, that very clear connection. So very, very, very important there, right? So plant your flag, tell your story. Step 3, follow the new path. What's super interesting here is that as you amplify your message, as you tell your story to more and more people, new paths will emerge for you. New paths are new opportunities, which is what you're trying to create. You're trying to create more of these new opportunities, and you're going to have to make some tough decisions. For me, as the Lean UX conversation was growing, I was doing less and less design work. And you'll recall from the beginning of the presentation, I was already worried about becoming obsolete as a designer. And now I'm actively doing less and less design work, right? Instead, I'm going out there and I'm traveling around the world and I'm teaching classes and I'm giving talks and people are asking me to come and teach the Lean UX stuff rather than do actual product design work at the time. And this worried me a lot, but this also created new opportunities. One of the more interesting and perhaps life-changing opportunities for me is that I got offered a book deal. It turns out that book publishers go to conferences to find the latest speakers on the latest topics. And this is absolutely true for tech conferences as well. And as I was getting out there and getting more, talks about Lean UX, I got offered a book deal to write the Lean UX book. And I decided to say yes. There was just one big problem about that. And it was that I didn't know how to write a book. Longest thing I'd ever written was maybe 500 words, maybe 750 words, and now they wanted 50,000. And it was overwhelming, right? It was overwhelming. But the thing to remember here is this, right? You could say that that's lucky, and I would agree with you that there's an element of luck here. But luck is, and I love this quote, right? Is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, right? And I was prepared for this opportunity because I decided to build this platform. I decided to create the space for these opportunities to take place. And when they happened, I said yes to them, even though I didn't know how to do it. And so I said yes to writing the book. And guess what? It was a disaster. It really was. It really was. I didn't know how to write a book, as I told you. It took me 2 years to get the book over the finish line. I churned through 3 editors. Thankfully, my longtime friend, co-author, and business partner, Josh Seiden, was my final editor. And without him, it would never have made it over the finish line. So I'm eternally grateful to him. And 4 times through the manuscript, right? I wrote that book 4 times. The first 3 times were awful. The 4th time was the least awful, right? But it gets published. And finally, 5 years, to be very, very clear, it took 5 years after my 35th birthday. I am now old. I'm now 40 years old, right? Lean UX gets published. And Lean UX fundamentally transforms my life, right? All of a sudden, it takes the conversation I was already having and pours fuel on that fire and really grows it exponentially, right? So that's embracing these new paths that come your way once you start to build the platform. The 4th step is teaching. Teaching is absolutely key. And every opportunity you have to teach is important, whether it's a workshop or a conference, webinar, podcast, guest articles, etc. Say yes to everything, because when you teach, you're storytelling. You're getting feedback on your material. You're learning the material better. You're learning how to improve your storytelling. You understand where your ideas resonate and where your ideas could use updating or where there are new content opportunities, right? And it's a great way to exercise the material, whether it's a big event or a small event or a local event. And this is good for freelancers. And if you work in-house, you can also do this in-house as well. There's endless opportunities for you to teach internally. This doesn't have to be for external folks at all, right? All of these are opportunities where you could potentially teach inside your organization and raise your awareness and credibility inside the company itself as you think about that. So teaching, it's what I do today. It's frankly, I was telling the story a few times over the last few weeks. Back in January, I ran into Gibson Biddle, the former VP of product at Netflix in Park City, Utah. He was skiing there and I was coincidentally skiing there as well. And I'd never met him before, and we started talking, and he and I, turns out we're doing roughly the same things these days. And he said, "What do you like best about your job these days?" And I said, "I like teaching." And he kind of gave me this kind of knowing smile, like, right? And it was a really big realization for me, because I never thought about being a teacher. I never thought I'd become a teacher. I didn't think I wanted to be a teacher. And yet here I am doing it on a daily basis, and I really like it. And I really, really enjoy it. So teaching. Look, the last step, and then we'll wrap this up, is giving it all away. This took me the longest to learn. This is still something I struggle with today, but there's this reciprocal cycle where whatever you have, the more that you give it away, the more comes back to you in the end. At least that's what I found, right? The more you give to the community, the more you give back, the more comes back to you. You do that by making your work and yourself easily findable and accessible, right? If you want to learn about me, everything's on my website, all of my blog posts, all of my articles, videos for talks, links to podcasts, visualizations, templates, it's all there. All right. I'm easily findable, and almost everything on there is free. The only thing that's not free is tickets to events, because that's the product that I actually sell. And the more that I put that out there, the more comes back in: questions and consulting opportunities and coaching opportunities and people buying tickets to events. And so that really helps build that platform. Whenever I travel, remember travel. I was going to say those were good old days. Sometimes they're good old days. I did too much of it, so I don't miss it that much. But whenever I would travel, and if I was doing a paid event during the day, I always try to do a free event in the evening, right? To build community locally, to give back, whether it's meetups or a local conference or a friend in an organization. And this is something that you can do as well, right? You don't have to speak on a giant stage, right? If you've got friends in an organization, ask to do a lunch session and do it for free. Get better at telling your story, build goodwill, give it away, build that community. Eventually that stuff comes back to you. Now, as I wrap this up, and we can do Q&A for 25 minutes, it seems like, a few things to remember, okay? If you're going to build a platform for yourself so that you can become forever employable, you have to stay relevant. Staying relevant means staying active in the conversation. Have a presence in the industry, in the domain, in the work, contribute, participate, right? Be a part of the discussion respectfully, of course, but you have to stay active in the discussion so that you are there, you're current, you're on top of things. As you think about reinvention, as you think about the next thing you want to get into and the next thing and the next thing, give yourself time to get there and to build up your credentials for that thing. I've found that at least 2 years is what I've needed to really build credibility around a new topic or an extension or expansion of the thing, that I was working on. Like, for example, this work that I'm doing with HR and finance and legal, right? Particularly HR, I don't really have any HR credentials, right? And so I've been starting to get into that conversation over the last couple of years, writing, listening, participating, asking questions, and then synthesizing those ideas into content about that and seeing how that resonates, right? And over the past 18 months, I've been doing that to the point where now I'm starting to see inbound invitations from that community to talk about agility in HR, agile in HR, forever employable, that kind of stuff as well. Okay. Couple last thoughts here. This is a path that worked for me. These are the steps that I learned, and it worked for me. There are many other options, and these may not work for you or may not be the right paths for you. pick and choose the pieces here that make sense for you. You don't have to follow. This is not a recipe necessarily. Pick and choose whatever works for you to make that happen. There's lots of other ways to build up your credibility and your platform and your recognized expertise and your thought leadership. One of the ways to do that as you move forward, and I'll wrap up with this quote, is to think about this quote from Bezos. Bezos always gets asked, what's going to change in 5 years? And he doesn't think about his business that way. He thinks about the things that won't change in the next 10 to 20 years. What are people always going to need? Right? How we deliver that value is going to change. The channels, the techniques, the methods, the brand names, et cetera, right? But what are people always going to need? And how can you create value around that perpetual need, right? People are going to need a safe place to work. They're going to need to grow and learn and develop, right? That type of thing. People are always going to need that, right? How do we take what we do and design the kind of careers and the kind of contributions that help people no matter what the channels are or the distribution methods are? Okay. So look, this is what worked for me. And I hope that it's helpful for you as well. I'd love to take your questions. I will say this, that the book is coming out next Tuesday, so in 6 days on June 16th. You can pre-order the Kindle version now. You get the info at foreveremployable.com or on Amazon. And then everything else, audio and print, comes out on June 16th. I would love for you to buy a copy of the book. I'd love for you to write a review if you do get it as well. So thank you very, very much for listening, and I'd love to take your questions.
Thanks. If there were an audience, there would be a lot of clapping that you could hear. Thanks, Jeff. That was awesome. There are so many questions, and thank you for answering one of them, which is recurring, which is, can we buy a hard copy of the book? So the answer is yes, it's coming.
Yeah, that's Tuesday. Literally
Tuesday. So, yeah, there's a lot of excitement here. I think, you've touched a chord with people, because here we're either working in agencies or are freelancers. A lot of people have a lot of the same kind of questions that you had been asking yourself at an earlier time, and probably continue to do so. So it's going to be hard to know exactly where to begin. Can
I just say, sorry, one thing, that I can't scroll fast enough on the chat to be able to copy paste something, because so many people are writing awesome, thank you, Jeff, great stuff, clapping hands and all that. So,
and let me do this. So before we jump into questions, I'm going to put this is my email address. I just dropped it in the chat there. If for some reason you don't get your question answered during the next 20 minutes, which is likely, then feel free to just email me your question, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Oh, that's awesome.
I am going to pin that email address. I pinned it at the top of the chat for now.
Correct.
During our discussion, so it doesn't get lost in all the clappy hands.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, during your talk, I captured a lot of the questions, so in a notepad. So
excellent.
There are some interesting ones related to building your career, and one person asked a really, really good one. How do you deal with anxiety and burnout? And was it ever an issue when you were building your career?
Anxiety and burnout. So look, anxiety, burnout is real, and so I'm talking about each one of them differently. So anxiety for me, the anxiety that I feel is the same anxiety I felt on the morning of my 35th birthday, which is I have to feed my family. That's the anxiety I feel every day. And that's my motivation, and that's my driver. Those two cute little girls that you saw, and my wife too, she just didn't happen to be in that particular photo. She took that photo. But those two little girls who aren't so little anymore, and my wife, like that's the anxiety that I feel. And I turn that into motivation, sometimes to too much motivation, which leads to the next thing that you asked about, right? But it's this sense of, I gotta make sure that this maintains literally forever, right? I don't typically like to speak in absolutes, but in this particular case, I need to maintain this forever employability, literally forever. And so that's the anxiety that I feel. I don't feel any anxiety on stage. or a virtual stage or whatever it is. And I think that comes from my music days. I've been on stage since I was a teenager. And so being in front of people, not a big deal necessarily, but the burnout that leads to is absolutely real. What's fascinating is that I was burning out with my travel schedule because I have a hard time saying no to work. And so over the last few years, I've been traveling at least 50% of the time, which feels like 100% half the time. And then the pandemic hit, and there was a part of me that was so relieved that I didn't have to do that anymore. And just kind of being home there was the stress of the pandemic, but the relief of just being home every day and actually building a routine. And what's fascinating is that now that anxiety kicked back in again. Okay, oh crap, I'm not traveling. And so now I'm over-indexing on video conferences and calls, right? So, and this type of thing. So I end up spending a lot of time in this chair, right? And so the Zoom burnout is real, right? As well. And so what I've been doing lately is I've been literally blocking out chunks of time in my calendar that just say blocked, right? I have an assistant who works with me on scheduling and everything, and we're very clear that nothing happens in that time. No calls, nothing at all. Like I absolutely need just that time to work, to think, to sit on the terrace, whatever it is, and that's helped tremendously.
So when's the musical coming?
You know, it was one time we were, I'll tell you a funny story. Josh and I were, Josh Side and I were speaking at UX Cambridge in the UK. And for some reason they had a piano on stage at the event. And we came up there, we put our laptops up, and I was checking the connectivity of my laptop, and there was a piano up there. And all I was just sat there kind of playing this kind of stuff. And like, we just kind of made up a song about wireframes and all this kind of, it was dumb, but that's where the idea came from. And it never went further than that, mercifully.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. This one about sort of your thoughts on being a deep generalist or T-shaped type career strategy. What's your opinion on that?
That's a tough one. I find myself to be a generalist. I think more. I'm trying to think. Like if I think about people who have successfully sort of planted a flag and become forever employable, they're T-shaped in a domain. Maybe there's a nuance here, actually, maybe because no one's asked me this yet, and I think it's an interesting thing. Maybe there's a T-shaped aspect to it from a domain expertise, right? So I'm the product management person. I'm going to own product management in healthcare or whatever it is, right? So that's with the T-shaped stuff. But I think that the sort of what Jared Spool calls the broken comb aspect of it, right? I don't know about combs, so I hear they're a thing, but this idea of then being able to channel that domain expertise in various ways, right? So not just technically proficient, but you can talk about it, you can teach it, you can communicate about it, you can present. I think that there's a mixture here of a broad set of skill sets to deliver your domain expertise. So I think it's a little bit of both there, in a sense, and I hope that made sense, right? So kind of really planting a flag in a specific domain, but then having a variety of skill sets to deliver that domain in a variety of ways, I think is the most powerful combination.
Sounds like you can plant many flags.
It's over time, I think, but it's tough. It's tough, right? So if you're successful and you become the person who kind of owns a particular flag, like for example, I'm the lean UX guy, right? There's a double-edged sword here where you are sort of forever that person. Mm-hmm. And if you ever want to become more than that person, it takes time and it takes a very explicit and lengthy effort. So for example, one of the biggest bits of feedback that Josh and I have heard over the years about lean UX is from almost every attendee, every time we teach the material, somebody says, "Oh, that was great. I wish my boss was here." And so Josh and I decided to write a book called Sense and Respond for the bosses. That wasn't a design book. It wasn't a tech book. It was a business book. And it's a business book that talks about digital transformation and business agility and building a culture of customer centricity and that type of thing that is conducive to great design work and great UX work. And for the first year of trying to have conversations with executives about Sense and Respond, the feedback was, "Oh, you're the lean UX guy, so go talk to my UX team." Mm-hmm. And my response was, this is not, look, I love the UX team, but this is not a conversation for them. I don't mind them being a part of it, but this is a much broader conversation, and it's tough. It's tough to kind of break out of that. So again, it takes time, and I think that you really need to plan that explicitly, to say, look, the next thing for me is going to be this expansion or this adjacent content bit or whatever it is, and I'm going to explicitly start working towards that now. And it's going to take time. It takes time.
I have a question here that is brought together from multiple ones, which basically looks at how do you see the either importance or preference or weight of freelancing, agency work, and corporate life in, I would say, in getting to that flag or being credible enough for planting that flag?
So I've done it all. So I can speak to a little. I've done all of that stuff. I think it's all valuable. I think that if you can, my advice for kind of early career folks, generally speaking, is either do agency work or startup work, because you'll get a tremendous amount of experience and a tremendous amount of stuff, right? I think that as you get older, then you can decide whether or not you want to stay in that field or not after you get some experience. But you can get a ton of experience very, very quickly. And so I think that there's value to all of it. I think that even if you choose to be sort of a career freelancer or a career in-house employee, that's your story, right? That's your unique expertise, right? Here's my 15-year look back at being an in-house designer, right? 15 years of in-house design career type of thing. Tremendously valuable, right? Tremendously valuable to building that platform, because there are millions of people just like that. Here's how I transitioned out of full-time employment to a freelance career. Millions of people like that, right? Why I've chosen to stay employed at agencies for the last 10 years or 15 years, or start my own agency, right? So I think while I've personally benefited from doing a little bit of everything, and I certainly would not recommend that, right? I think that certainly that's good. There's nothing wrong with saying, look, I'm just going to spend my time in agencies, and that's how it's going to work for me, or as a freelancer. There's still plenty of stuff to build off of there.
You're coaching teams quite often, right?
Yeah.
There's a question about pushback from other teams and work colleagues. I don't know. I'll read you the question and see how you feel it. How do you embrace the idea of being an expert against objections and pushback from other teams and work colleagues?
Yeah. Look, so I do think there's an element of risk, I think, when you're doing this in-house, to where you kind of come off as the person who's trying to outshine everybody and maybe even outshine the organization. And certainly some organizations are not going to take this well, right? So you're trying to build your brand bigger than the company brand or something like that. I think that's a poor way to see things, and I think it's short-sighted. The more that you can do to help the teams, right? So as long as you're helping the teams, you're not trying to necessarily take credit or become this internal rock star necessarily, but you're saying, look, here's what we're learning. Let me share it with you, right? And you're elevating your team, and you're being realistic about how that work was developed, right? Nobody works by themselves. Nobody learns everything by themselves. We build stuff together as a team. We learn from our colleagues, and then we want to give not only those colleagues credit, but we want to give those colleagues access, right? Access to the spotlight, access to the microphone. I think that as you're doing that, if you're doing that, then it's going to be tough for the organization to really be upset with you. And if you find an organization that's upset with you in that particular sense, I would dig for the root of that a little bit. And I don't know exactly how to do that, whether it's behind the scenes or just kind of a more explicit why does this upset you kind of conversation. But and it could be a variety of things, not the least of which is people feel threatened by it, which is an interesting cultural trait. And like I said, sometimes the organization might feel threatened by it as well and not really see the benefits, because I think there are tremendous benefits to people building platforms for themselves as they work in-house, because ultimately you're going to attract the kind of people who want to you're going to base that content on work you're doing at the office, and you're going to attract people to the company who want to work that way. And that's, again, tremendously valuable as well. So I think you're giving the company a human voice rather than a strictly HR or PR or comms driven voice.
Are you seeing a change in that in companies these days? I mean, Jeff Patton, when he started his talk, one of the first things he said this morning was, and I'm sure you've seen it a lot in your teaching with him, that, and I took your class too here in Geneva, that, UX people come onto a project and a lot of the decisions are already made, what we're building, who we're building it for, what market need we're targeting, et cetera. And they don't necessarily get to participate in that early on strategic decision. And I'm wondering if you're seeing a shift nowadays in companies to bring that type of decision making and that knowledge that the UX and value UX can bring to that part of the phase.
Sometimes, not enough. It's still kind of frustrating, and it varies. It varies by country a lot, but definitely not. So look, sometimes is the answer to that thing. So for example, there are people out there who have really done a tremendous job in building global UX practices and developing the culture of an organization to include UX in that process. For example, Greg Petroff, right? Greg Petroff, really interesting guy, has built a tremendous design leadership career over the last 30 years, I'm guessing, at least, right? So he was chief experience officer at GE under Beth Comstock, and then he was at Google for a while, and ServiceNow. I think he's at ServiceNow now. Yeah. and people like him are examples of C-level designers, in designers in the C-suite who then enable more of that to happen. I just don't think there are enough Greg Petroffs in the world. I think that, and what I mean by that is not only designers in the C-suite, but designers who think like him. He's got a user experience background. He's got an interaction design background, and he really brings that to the conversation, and that creates much more opportunity inside those organizations. Whereas you might find like a chief design officer who's got a marketing background and less of a UX or a design background, and that maybe is not happening as much. So sometimes, not enough. That's really the
Peter, you have another one there?
I wanted to mention that there is a poll, so you can vote on how you liked Jeff's talk. And looking at the questions, someone asked, and I like this because it's very personal. Hi, Jeff, can you please draw an explicit connection between how the vintage keyboard knowledge came to the trends and current events and the target audience led to Lean UX? So basically, before Lean UX, when you woke up, on that 35th birthday morning, so what was that connected you to getting there?
Yeah, well, it didn't connect, right? It was a choice not to do it. But I mean, the short of it was, look, I have this knowledge and experience and expertise, plus the physical elements were in my house. I had 5 of them in my house. My wife loved me for that, and the basement was my room. And, and there's a community around that world of vintage instruments and vintage keyboards. And there has always kind of been, certainly over the last 30 years, a movement towards, as music making has become more technically enabled, more digital, there's always that retro aspect to music creation, right? So yeah, you can get it all on an iPad and that's awesome, but like, wow, like people, there's a lot of folks who will kind of go and seek out the classic instruments. So I have the knowledge, I've got the expertise, there's a community, and there's a trend towards retro instruments as part of music making, live music and production and that type of thing. So for me, there was an option there. It's just that community is really small, it's really niche, and I don't know, I didn't feel like I could make a go of it there. It didn't feel like where to go, and so I decided to focus more on professional stuff. So so it's not a line, but it was a decision not to pursue that, even though I felt like there was an opportunity there.
And I have one last request. So you showed that flow chart or mind map kind of thing, which I think is if I remember well from one of your earlier talks, is I think like a good humbling experience, because if someone's listening in, then he might say, yeah, everything worked for Jeff. Like, he's a superstar and has always been. Can you just like in 2 minutes reflect on that flow and sort of how it was handed to you? Because I think that is a lesson that everyone needs to hear from someone who's written 3 books.
Yes. Yeah. So it's in the Lean UX book, that diagram, and it's probably on my blog at some point. So that was a chart that I found on my desk one Monday morning after 6 months of trying to figure out Agile and UX with my team at the Ladders. I felt like we had done it. I felt like things were going great. I felt like we had solved the problem. I really did. And I come and like whistling to work one Monday morning, and I show up at my desk, and sitting on my keyboard at my desk is the printout with that flow chart on it. And that was the output of a venting session that my team did without me. They were so frustrated. They were so pissed off about how poorly things were going, and that they went off and they did this whole session, and they diagrammed their frustrations, and they sent it to me by printing it out and putting it on my desk. And it was a real shock to me, because I really felt like we were making progress. And if you look at that chart, if you look at it in the Lean UX book, one of the boxes says Jeff never available, right? Which was part of the reason why I was unaware that they were so pissed off. And it was true. I was in meetings, 10 hours a day, and it was difficult for me, but I felt like we were making progress. And we weren't, and we were actually very, very far from progress. We were just not making it. And my team, this was my team's subtle way of letting me know, and it was a game changer for me. Like, really looking at those boxes, it was almost like a checklist of things to go fix, right? And we went through that one by one, and it made. I see that as the turning point, honestly. Like, I see that day as the turning point in my approach and thinking, and I'm grateful to the team for that.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and we'll talk again soon.
Awesome, folks. Thanks so much for including me. This is amazing.
Yeah, I hope that you get some time, maybe later after, in the afternoon, to check out what's going on. And when you wake up tomorrow morning, we'll still be here, depending on where you are.
Good luck. Good luck, folks. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks,
See you later.
Bye, folks.